boys. The biggest hint I got to the answer came from talking to detransitioners. Remember, these are young women who underwent transition and then later regretted it. Again and again, they told me that while they were transitioning, they were angry, they were sullen, and they were politically radical. They very often cut off their families. They were coached in this by transgender influencers online, and they rushed toward their new glitter families. You'll often see gender-confused people among the ranks of Antifa or at Black Lives Matter rallies. Having turned against their families of origin, they are easy prey for those who recruit revolutionaries. Put another way, the chaos is the point. Just as the point of critical race theory is to turn the American people against one another, so the point of gender ideology is to stop the formation of stable families, the building blocks of American life. Let me say this again. This is not the goal of all transgender adults, but it is the goal of gender ideology and the transgender movement, namely the creation of a new victim class eager to join the revolution. So what do we do about this? How do we push back on the onslaught of gender ideology? First, we must oppose the indoctrination of children in gender ideology. There is absolutely no good reason for it, and it does very real harm. You can absolutely insist that all children treat each other kindly without indoctrinating an entire generation in gender confusion. Second, in public, we must speak up and we must speak the truth. Always, wherever we find ourselves, at work, whatever we do, we must refuse to recite the lies. If conservatives are to confront these issues, we must know something about them. We must overcome our squeamishness. We must clearly distinguish, for instance, between transgender Americans, many of whom are wonderful, and an ideological movement which seeks to warp our children and wreck our families. This is a movement that would turn our children against themselves because its advocates know there's no greater horror to a parent. There is no quicker way to bring America to its knees than by prompting our children to do irreversible damage to themselves. The people who've been pushing this ideology, they got a big head start on us, perhaps by a decade. But they have awakened a sleeping giant. The success of my book, the fact that I was invited to speak to you today, and the state legislators that are now debating these issues testify that a cultural battle is at last being fought. We cannot afford to lose. These are our kids and grandkids. Our future literally depends on our winning this. Thank you.
We now have time for a few questions.
Okay.
If you would like to ask a question, please come make your way to a microphone.
Abigail, couple things. Number one, Caitlyn Jenner. Couple questions. One, have you ever met her? Number two, would you vote for her at this point if you were a California resident? And number three, if she were to become governor of California, how would this movement change?
Okay, so I would have, I don't know very much about her politics. I really don't, except that she's a Republican and supported Trump. I don't have any problem with electing someone like Caitlyn Jenner. I will tell you that she has certainly pushed back on some of the activists, and she has said that transitioning was easier than coming out and supporting Trump. I just don't see that as a threat. Her, or, you know, as far as I know her, and I don't, you know, have great knowledge of her politically. I'm not sure anyone does. But I don't see someone like her as a threat. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who has a history of encouraging puberty blockers on children isn't a problem. The biggest threat we're facing in America right now is, and Elizabeth Warren, I think a week ago, said that it's transitioning care, you know, they call it gender affirming care. This is another lie. Gender affirming. It's only affirming your gender. That's all we're doing. Is a right, a human right of children. Elizabeth Warren said that. The moment it becomes a human right, every parent who disagrees with it has to worry about their custody. This is coming here. It's already all over Canada. This is coming here. It will absolutely threaten parents' custody rights if they don't go along with it. And when I tell you the parents who call me are politically progressive, the ones who have lost their daughters to this supported gay marriage long before it was legal. They do not have any issue with gay people. They do not have any issue with gay rights. They do not have any issue with transgender rights. They simply didn't think it was right for their daughter. They thought she had other mental health problems, and that's an issue for social workers and therapists. They were undermined by their teachers. They were undermined by the therapists they paid for. They were undermined by their doctors. Everyone affirmed the kid against the parents' wishes.
Question to the speakers left.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here. I'm a retired neurosurgeon, and I have been combing through all the medical literature, and it's been shocking to me to see on just about every medical topic that this social justice infiltration has taken place, that the racial justice issues are also taking place, and that with our latest plague, the science is not science, okay? This is not valid scientific method for any of this. And it mortifies me, okay? But also, there has to be more behind it. Granted, you've got your cultural and social and political issues, but are you following the money? Who's profiting from this? And that will answer a lot of other questions. And frankly, you know, this is more than just a cultural war, it's a spiritual one. And this is the epitome of darkness. Thank you.
Should I respond? Okay, so, sorry. Like I said, I'm not used to friendly audiences. Sorry. Okay, so that's right. I mean, there is a political, there is a question of the funding. I don't personally, you know, there are journalists who have done work to trace the funding. I actually look at the culture. I mean, that's what I do as a journalist. I look at cultural phenomena. And part of the reason is, well, I do it because that is what interests me. I mean, that's the truth. But I will say this. Conservatives are really good at understanding things in terms of politics. What we're not so great at is fighting cultural battles. One might say we're pretty bad at it. Because we see an issue like this and we kind of say, ugh, that has nothing to do with me. Yeah, actually it has everything to do with everyone in this room. It's being pushed so aggressively in the public school systems that there are, I was able to, in my book, I talk about my investigation into the California public school system, and what I found was that there was no distinction between the activists and the public school teachers. The activists are literally training the teachers.
Yes, Abigail.
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Can't see.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you so much for being here. You've written such an important book. I actually discovered you on the interview that you did with Jordan Peterson, which I would welcome everybody to check out online. I guess I just wanted to expand on the previous question. I have a lot of doctors in my family and haven't really gotten any satisfaction when I've tried to talk with them. With regard to the Hippocratic Oath and the doctors that you spoke with, I mean, how did they reconcile performing these surgeries and hormone treatments with that oath?
So I talk about this a lot in my book because I interviewed some of the surgeons who performed these surgeries, and so anyway, I talked to them, and I go through that a little bit. But one of the things I will say is, this really is an ideology, and when it captures people, there's a remarkable incuriosity about basic science. So, for instance, they will say to me, but they're so happy when they seem very pleased. I'm saving lives. They believe that. Now, the Dr. Lisa Littman, who did the original study on this, one of the things that alarmed her, and I talk about in my book, is that when she attended a WPATH conference, that's a medical conference for transgender health, it was the old Transgender Health Society, what she couldn't believe is that when they would discover, this was her first, she's an OB-GYN by that was her first residency and whatnot, and this was her first WPATH conference, and I think 2017 she attended. And what she discovered was that it was the only medical conference she had ever attended. This woman is a politically progressive, where no one was discussing the risks. It was a celebration-only zone. And in fact, they would then go on to deplatform speakers. Now, these were experts in gender dysphoria like Ken Zucker. These are not right-wingers. But if they were willing to talk about risks or any course of treatment other than immediate transition, they were canceled.
Question to the speakers left.
Thank you kindly for coming and addressing us. Phenomenal talk, and awesome that you talked about the how. At the end, you mentioned the why, to create chaos. I guess I would submit it's a little deeper than that. I would think that it's just pure evil. And I guess my question to you would be, do you think that this is one of the roads to what a lot of progressives, uber billionaires, talking about depopulation of our planet? When you mentioned that, 30% go on to do the testosterone and then are infertile?
It's hard for me to assign motivation without evidence. So unless I would never make a claim like that unless I had proof that this was part of an effort to depopulate the planet. If there was evidence, I would certainly look at it. But I think, the way to understand it is really to look at other radical left movements. Because they seem very similar. They seem to be creating chaos in the population because if you have total chaos and overhaul, then what you want is redemption through this new political order. So that seems to be what they're priming everyone for. But again, not everyone needs to, who promotes this needs to be totally aware of that, but they're participating in an ideological movement that seems to be headed that way.
Question to the speakers, right? Hi, thank you so much for your book. I have 2 children, a son who is 15 and a daughter who's 17. They went to a very small middle school in Northern California. We know 5 girls in that school that are transitioning. One of them is my son's closest girlfriend, and she's becoming Tyler, and her parents went through a really messy divorce, right? And she's politically very radical. But another mom I just spoke with, her 10-year-old daughter came home saying, I'm binary, pansexual, and I'm identifying as a boy now. I don't know what to say to her. I just need some practical advice. What should I say to this mother?
Well, a couple of things. I think the book is helpful because my book doesn't exactly tell you, it gives you some suggestions, but it really isn't about what to do. It's more about how to understand this. But to all of you, I would say, the moment you hear that, get your kids out of that school. I have talked to parents who have lost their kids to this. They push it very hard at many universities. And I can tell you how much less they care about that Ivy League sticker after their kid is now on hormone treatments. Because this happens over and over. It's completely covered by every Ivy League school. You can start school, and in some cases, they ended without their breasts. It absolutely happens. I guess that's an advertisement for Hillsdale. Yeah, go ahead.
Question to the speakers left.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Years ago, I spent some time in Sweden with the military. And one of the things I learned about Sweden was through the people I was working with, where they said the state owns your children. And I said, what do you mean by that? They said, we bring them up, we feed them, we put clothes on them, but we do not own them. The state can come in anytime they care to and remove them from your family for any reason. Well, that started me thinking about it, and over the years I've discovered that the Marxist lifestyle is to break down the family any way they can, and once they take over, they can change things to fit their situation. They want to create chaos, like you were saying in your book. This is all a useful distraction for something else that you're talking about. It's just one out of many distractions. So the type of politics that we're heading toward will be, as you said, the way the left works. This is not their real agenda. Their real agenda is control over every living thing.
Question to the speakers, right?
Thank you, Abigail, for being here. That was a nice tee up, really just to a comment to say thank you for helping this audience connect the dots between your work and the broader theme of critical race theory. I think Mark Stein touched on this a little bit last night around the language of CRT and understanding what it is and us taking control back of our language. That's really, really important. And I think Andy will probably touch on this around his work because it is all fabulously and destructively connected. So thank you for your work in helping us connect the dots.
Thank you.
Question to the speakers left.
I'm sure my wife is asking herself, what are you doing, Bill? But first of all, I want to salute you and thank you for your courage.
Thank you.
You have done a wonderful job of presenting things that, for me personally, were always sort of lying under the surface. And I guess I'm to the point that I'm just tired of sitting and saying and doing nothing about it. And I keep asking, you've given a lot of reasons and justifications for what these people are doing with and to our country. But I keep coming back to the question of why and who. And I guess I'm left with the conclusion of where are the roots of this, and dare I say, Satan. There just seems to be no real justifiable reason for what's happening in America today. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Question to the speakers, right?
Hey, thank you. I was wondering if you could clarify something I might have misunderstood earlier, and then also have a question based off of that. You were talking about infertility, and I couldn't tell if it was caused by the beta blockers themselves or the fact that they move on to testosterone?
Okay, so that's a really good question. Puberty blocker, going from puberty blockers, so blocked puberty straight to cross-sex hormones, virtually guarantees infertility. Starting with a course of testosterone, most of the kids who, many of the kids who discover this in their teen years, they've already been through puberty. So they go straight to testosterone. And that puts fertility at very serious risk for various reasons, but it's not the guarantee that going from puberty blockers to testosterone is.
But puberty blockers themselves, do those cause infertility, or is it more what comes afterwards?
Well, you can't have a baby if you haven't gone through puberty. So of course you aren't fertile while you haven't even been through puberty. And then if the puberty blockers, if you go off the puberty blockers, there is a chance, you may just revert to normal. We don't really have the data yet to know because we haven't been experimenting on these kids for long enough. So, I mean, it is experimental treatment. That's what we're doing. We're conducting a mass experiment. So traditionally, puberty blockers were used in many different ways, but one of the ways was there's a condition called precocious puberty, and that is when a 4-year-old starts developing breasts. So we shut off an overactive pituitary, essentially, or we pause it. That was the idea. It was a pause button, and then you could release. We could take the kid off of it. Around the time it would be normal and healthy to go through puberty, and at that point, puberty seemed to take its course without problem. The problem is we're now putting puberty blockers into a different population. These are kids who are going through healthy, normal puberty, and we're arresting that. And I've been told by many doctors, this is not my own research, but many doctors, when you arrest a healthy system, when you shut down a healthy system that's operating properly in the endocrine system, there's just no guarantee that it's going to pick up where it was supposed to if you go off them. Now, again, we don't have the research yet to know one way or the other.
Thank you. That makes a lot more sense. So I guess my question is, it sounds like we're seeing that the current social trend is creating like a hyperinflation of people who are, or children who are, have gender dysphoria. Is it possible that before now there was, it kind of skewed lower than it actually was due to it being a lot harder to come out
right.
as gender dysphoric? And have you ever seen a child in the instance where if we found that puberty blockers were potentially healthy, where they could have the case to actually benefit from it?
Sure. So are there these kids who absolutely have gender dysphoria and might be helped by puberty blockers? Yes. It's totally possible. And that is why I have never supported the bans. I have never come out in favor of banning a treatment that might potentially work for one child or be appropriate for one child. I'm totally open to the possibility that it might be appropriate for one child. Now, the other question, how do we know we're not reverting to a normal base rate? How do we know this isn't the rate that we would all be at? This isn't the number of transgender people we would always have seen if not for all the stigma and harassment that they experience. And my answer to that is, where are the women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s discovering their transgender identity? Now's their time. Where are they? Why is it the same population that falls for every other social contagion, teen girls, with other mental health comorbidities? We should see this across the whole population. We don't.
Possible that it's somewhere in the middle or even lower, or at least higher than it was, is I guess what I'm saying. Like, we're probably higher than we would be now, but we do see people in their middle age now who are transitioning and for the first time feel comfortable to do so. Do you still think it's probably higher than it used to be, at least? So is this the normal rate that the natural rate that we would see? Is that what you're asking me? I'm asking if you think the 2007 rate was the normal rate, or falls somewhere in the middle.
I don't know how I could possibly know that. How do I know that, what the effect of culture is? I mean, I have someone I've become, very friendly with who was a lesbian for years, and now, and transitioned because she was involved with a woman who was uncomfortable being in a lesbian relationship. She transitioned in her, I think, 40s to male and regretted that. So, you know, and I'm not saying that everyone would regret it. You know, obviously we make all kinds of decisions as adults. I'm completely fine with adults making those decisions. But if you're asking me in the absence of culture, what would the number of transgender people be? I don't know how I could have any idea.
We have time for one more question to speakers left.
I better make it a good one if I'm the last one. Abigail, I discovered you through the Megyn Kelly podcast, which was excellent. And one of the things that drew me to you is your kindness and your compassion, that there are people who really do suffer from this. And it's a small number, but they deserve treatment. And for those who are struggling, we need to be kind in our conversation about them. So I appreciate that about you. My first exposure to a trans child was through a youth group at church. And the church completely bent over and supported this child and really wrestled their parents to the floor when they tried to object. So I would echo your sentiment that if you are in a church that is advocating this, get out of that church. My question is, kids, you know, teen years, hardest years of your life, you're changing, the hormones are going crazy. But we know girls develop around the age of 18, boys' frontal lobe not fully developed until 24. So for those who are, sorry guys, what do you advocate for someone who really does need this treatment if we're saying delay, let them grow up, let them fully develop? What is the age to have this conversation?
It's a good question. I would say two things. One, to the point about your church, I mean, the part of the problem is we have churches diagnosing kids, right? We have pastors saying, oh, it's a trans kid. They don't know, right? There are little boys who are effeminate and girls who are a little more masculine, and they would just grow up and lead, you know, healthy lives. Many of them would become gay, some of them wouldn't. But today they turn around and say, oh, it's a trans kid. They've already decided what the diagnosis is, what the identity is, and started them down a path. That's, you know, that's very unusual for a medical condition. But there's something else you asked. The second question was, oh, what age? Well, here's what I would say. I know a lot of transgender adults, and the ones I've talked to are leading good lives and stable and good people, and people you would absolutely want as your friends and neighbors. They have told me transitioning is really hard, and they were really grateful for the time they spent in therapy making sure this would be right for them. They had to spend a certain period of time living as the opposite gender, trying to see if they could do this, because it's very stressful. Okay? Today, there's no requirement. There's no requirement that you get a therapist note. There's no requirement for anything. I mean, almost anything, right? So, the age of medical consent varies by state. Okay? So, whatever people ultimately decide the age may be, and I'm not a doctor, but whatever people decide the appropriate age may be, it certainly has to come with some sober medical oversight. And right now we have virtually none. What they have is medical encouragement and celebration.
Join me in thanking Mrs. Schreier.
Angel.